Welcome to Ask Lynnwood Cop. I'm Teresa Whipple, and I'm here with Officer Mark Brinkman. Welcome.
Thank you.
You're a drug recognition expert.
Right, that's correct.
So explain what that is exactly.
So, drug recognition expert, the program is focused on identifying people that are driving vehicles impaired by something other than alcohol.
Okay.
So, an officer stops a car, for whatever the reason might be, recognizes that the driver is impaired by something, and eliminates alcohol as the causation of the impairment, and then what do you do with them from there? So that's where a DRE comes into play.
Okay. And you were telling me that there are specific signs that you look for and a lot of training that goes into becoming a DRE. So explain what's involved with that.
Right. There's about 200 DREs in Washington State and about 40 active instructors. I'm an instructor in this. And so we are able to, through the schooling we have, it's about a 100-hour class session and then a 40-hour in-field session. And through that, officers learn the physiology in the human body associated with signs and symptoms of different drug use in different categories. So we have 7 categories of drugs that all drugs fit into, whether it's methamphetamines or heroin, and those all fit into a category. So a subject is arrested, a driver is arrested for driving under the influence, then taken to the station. A DRE is called if it's impairment other than alcohol, and the DRE does about a 45-minute evaluation using pulse rates, blood pressure, pupil sizes, pupil reaction to the different light settings, some questioning, some more sobriety type testing. After that process, the DRE can give an expert opinion as to what category of drug or categories of drugs the person is under the influence of, and then based on that expert opinion, that helps them get the search warrant for the blood for the driver, and it also helps the prosecution of the driver in court for DUI, which is probably the biggest part of this, because if a driver has blood taken by a warrant or voluntary blood, and the blood comes back showing certain levels of, let's say, heroin in this case, which would come back in the blood as morphine, how do you prove that that amount of morphine, or what was heroin, actually impaired the person's ability to drive a car safely? And DRE can give an expert testimony, be an expert witness as to how that was impairing.
Okay. And, let's talk about, many questions come to mind, but let's start with prescription drugs in particular. I think
Right.
a lot of us maybe get a prescription from the doctor and think that that's just okay. We
Sure.
don't necessarily read the fine print, even though we should,
Right.
about what you should or shouldn't be doing, and a lot of times driving is probably not one of them. So that's something that you deal with on a regular basis, I'm assuming.
Right. We find a lot of our daytime crashes actually are people that are under influence of a prescription drug.
Right.
Prescription drugs generally are going to be a painkiller or something in the depressant category for depression.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times people, there's several causation factors. One, people get the prescription and it'll say on the bottle, especially if it's a depressant or narcotic being a painkiller, don't operate heavy machinery. And, well, if I'm not driving a backhoe, I can drive a car, right?
Right.
So they're driving a 2-ton piece of heavy machinery down a road. That's heavy machinery and they can't do it safely. So if someone is prescribed a depressant medication, generally it takes about 3 months for a person's body to adjust to become tolerant to that medication and be able to function and drive safely after that period of building up a tolerance to it. And now they're, in a sense, normal while they're on the medication, right?
Right.
And so during that time period, sometimes people can't operate safely. A lot of times other people feel, well, if one is good and I'm really depressed today, I'll take 2, that's even better. Of course, now they're impaired.
Yeah.
And of course, then the painkillers, generally, you don't want to drive under the influence of those at any point. You really don't become tolerant enough to painkillers to actually drive safely. But so many times accidents are caused by, and driving unsafe in general, by prescribed drugs. And of course now cannabis is legal, right, in Washington State. So we can consider cannabis is a legal drug, and a lot of people think, well, because it's legal, I can drive a car. Well, you can't drive a car legally under the influence of cannabis. A lot of people think that that's okay now.
Right, which
But-
is always ironic to me because it's like it's not legal to drive under the influence of alcohol, so why would people think that? But
Right.
Yeah.
And people generally don't think they're impaired when
Right.
they use cannabis.
got it.
But of course, we have, if you're smoking cannabis, you might have 30 nanograms of THC level, but then you go to the edibles and oils and things like that, now you're up to 90, 95% THC levels. So people get impaired pretty quickly by, depending on what type of cannabis they're using.
Okay. And, one other thing I wondered, because we hear so much about the opioid crisis, and are you seeing more of that kind of thing on the road?
Yeah. In general, impaired driving, we are seeing more impaired drivers by drugs now than we're alcohol across the board. And specifically in our area of Snohomish, Keene County area, besides cannabis, but really the more impairing substances we're finding people driving under the influence of is methamphetamines and heroin being an opiate.
Right.
So most opiate users we're finding now are also doing methamphetamines also. So those are kind of the two major drug groups we're actually now arresting people under the influence of.
Okay. Do you have a most memorable case in terms of something that you just scratched your head and said, I can't believe this person did this?
Well, there's been a lot of them.
I'm sure there have. And I'm thinking about, I remember a couple of years ago when made the national news, there were a couple of parents there was a photo that went viral of parents who were in a car with a toddler, and they were both, I think they had to use Narcan to revive either one or both of
Right.
them.
Yeah.
Anything that severe that's happened that you've been aware
So
of?
my most memorable case was really the alcohol case.
Okay.
I told this
And by
story.
the way, we should let people know 3,000 DUIs that you've
just
been
over,
involved
over
with?
3,000
Wow.
around there.
Pretty amazing.
Pretty
Okay, so
impaired
tell me
driving.
tell me about the case.
So the case was really spurred my interest in impaired driving in the first place. It was when I was working at the county sheriff's office, and a vehicle came by a stop sign, and myself and another deputy were talking, and they kind of burned out. I saw it was some teenagers in the car, and it was like a prom night or something. I'm not sure. It was a special high school night, right? And so I didn't stop and think I don't want to be that local town cop or whatever that hassles the teenagers. So I let them go. Then about a couple hours later, the other deputy got home. I went to an accident on a back road. It's the same car that we had seen earlier. Now it's flipped over on its top, and the driver is suspended by her seatbelt. She's hurt, but she's not life-threatening. The passenger had been ejected out the window, has a very massive head injury. So I'm focused on trying to stop the bleeding. This is Woodby Allen. There's one ambulance, and it's on another call, so it's going to take a good 40 minutes for ambulance to show up. In the meantime, I'm trying to stop her bleeding, and she'd come to and scream for help, and then go unconscious. And it's nighttime, and it's kind of like a crazy movie scene, really. And then eventually, the ambulance shows up, and they take the girl I'm holding, and put her in an ambulance. Gave her a shot of something to take the brain swelling down, which gave her the ability to become more coherent and conscious for a short period of time. She talked to us a little bit about where she's hurting, and then flatlined and died right there. And so then we did, of course, an investigation. The driver is a 0.18 alcohol level. And so I'm thinking, well, if I'd stopped that car in the first place when I saw it at the stop sign, then I would have arrested the driver undoubtedly. This girl wouldn't be dead. The other girl driving wouldn't have known for the rest of her life I killed my best friend on a prom night, I think it was. So that's definitely, there's a lot of them, but that was definitely the most memorable, for me, probably the most kind of career-changing experience that I've dealt with. Yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing story and a sobering on so many levels story, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Any advice you would have other than, that last thing? I think if people think about that might give them pause, but any other advice you have for people? I mean, it seems obvious, read the labels on the prescriptions and know that heavy machinery applies to automobiles, but anything else you want to share with people before we sign off?
I think the main message we want to get across from the police department or any police department is that if you're going to go out and smoke cannabis or do illegal drugs or drink, then have a plan before you go out and do that. Don't think, well, I'm going to go out and I won't drive, because by the time you have a few drinks, your judgment's gone and you don't know if you should drive or not, right? So Uber to the bar so you don't have a choice to drive home, or take a taxi. They're a lot cheaper than DUI. And then if you're the designated driver is not who had the least amount to drink. A designated driver is someone that had nothing to drink. And you a lot of times get free soda or free snacks if you're the designated driver. So have a plan beforehand, and then we're not saying don't have a good time, but figure out how you're going to do that safely.
Okay, very good advice. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll be back soon with another episode of Ask the Lynnwood Cop.